There's a strange irony in the way healing sometimes works. You spend months, perhaps years, quietly putting your life back together. You mend the frayed edges of your self-esteem and finally reach a plateau of genuine peace. Then, at the exact moment the dust has settled and you've reclaimed your sense of self, the phone vibrates. A name flashes on the screen, a name that used to mean everything and now, theoretically, should mean nothing. It feels like a glitch in the timing of the universe. Why now? Why, at the very moment our recovery feels most grounded, does the past decide to knock? To understand this, we have to look past the coincidence and look at the mechanics of human behavior. Most people assume that the return of an old partner is a commentary on that person's growth, or lack thereof. But the real narrative doesn't actually start with their message. It starts with the internal shift that happens inside you the moment that notification appears. Take Amanda, for example. She had spent the last year rebuilding after a relationship defined by an exhausting push-pull dynamic. Her progress wasn't loud, it was found in the small, quiet victories. It was the absence of that heavy morning dread and the fact that she could finally have coffee with friends without that constant anxious urge to check her phone. Amanda had reached a place of real stability. She was sleeping through the night and had stopped waiting for an apology she knew might never come. By all accounts, she was doing well. Then came a random Tuesday. Amanda was settling in with a book when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The message was disarmingly simple. I saw something today that reminded me of you. Or perhaps, I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately. The specific words are rarely the point. What matters is the presence of the message, the way it forces your brain to suddenly recalibrate, much like a draft from an open window on a quiet night. We often view these moments as a cosmic test or a cruel joke, wondering if the universe is trying to undo our hard work. But there are more grounded reasons why people often reappear just when we are finally okay. Sometimes it is a byproduct of simple human nostalgia or a fleeting moment of loneliness. Other times it might be a way to gauge if the emotional door is still ajar, a way to see if the access they once had to your life is still available. Crucially, we should avoid absolute labels. Not every reaching out is a calculated act, nor is every message a sign of a soulmate returning. It is simply an event, a data point. The risk isn't in the message itself, but in the immediate reflexive assumption we make when our guard is down. Amanda felt it, that tiny, flickering spark of what if. Even after all her work, a part of her brain began to run a simulation. Maybe he finally understands. Maybe my absence taught him what my presence couldn't. It's a common human tendency to prioritize a hopeful, potential future over a very real, documented past. This internal tug-of-war is where we encounter the concept of hoovering. It's a term often used to describe those attempts to draw someone back into a previous relationship dynamic just as they've begun to move forward. It can function as a behavioral pattern that reopens a familiar connection, often appearing long before any actual internal change has taken place. This pull is usually subtle. It doesn't always look like a grand gesture. It often looks like vulnerability. It might be an apology that sounds sincere, a shared memory, or a checking in that feels harmless. Often, it's phrased in a way that appeals to the person you used to be. However, we have to be careful with these definitions. To label every attempt at reconnection as hoovering would be to ignore the complexity of human growth. People can and do change, but the distinction between a genuine shift and a temporary pullback to the old ways isn't found in a single text. It is found in the architecture of their behavior over time. This is where Amanda, and perhaps you, reach the most critical part of the story. It's the moment where intellect meets impulse. To navigate this, we have to shift our focus away from trying to read their mind and toward our own discernment. We have to stop being detectives of their soul and start being guardians of our own peace. How do you tell the difference between a genuine evolution of character and the return of an unhealthy cycle? The answer is rarely in the content of the message, but in the cadence of the follow-through. Genuine change is a marathon, not a sprint. It's evidenced by a consistent, quiet accountability that doesn't demand an immediate reward. It's found in the way a person respects a boundary even when it's inconvenient for them. If the return feels like a high-pressure approach, as if they are trying to convince you they've changed, it's possible the underlying pattern remains the same. True growth usually doesn't need to shout to be noticed. As Amanda engaged with the conversation, she noticed something familiar. The words were different. They were polished and seemingly more self-aware. Yet the rhythm of the interaction hadn't shifted. There was still that subtle undercurrent of urgency, and the conversation consistently leaned back toward his needs and his reflections, while her own boundaries were treated as minor hurdles to get past. It was in this moment that Amanda reached a realization that changed the entire narrative. This is the pivot point. The real test was never whether he would come back into her life. The true measure of her growth was whether the old version of Amanda would be the one to answer the door. This insight fundamentally changes how we view the return of an old partner. A message from the past can reawaken insecurities you thought were gone. But healing isn't about the absence of those feelings, it's about the presence of a new choice. Before she began her journey, Amanda's response would have been a reflex, a surge of hope followed by an immediate dive back into the old cycle. Now, however, she possessed what we can call the power of the pause. Think of this pause as an internal circuit breaker. When a message arrives, instead of the emotional electricity flowing straight into your old habits, the pause allows you to stop and look at the situation as an observer. You start to see the pattern as something happening in front of you rather than something happening to you. In practice, the power of the pause follows a simple sequence: trigger to pause, to observe, to boundary, to choice. When the trigger, the message, hits, you intentionally stop. You observe the behavior without judgment. You check it against your boundaries. And finally, you make a choice based on who you are now, not who you were then. There is a common misconception that healing means reaching a state of total amnesia, that you should never feel curious or nostalgic. But that is an almost impossible standard. Real healing is more human. It's the ability to feel that familiar tug of the past and, for the first time, decide not to follow it. His message no longer determined what Amanda felt, what she did, or what happened next. That was her emotional payoff. For Amanda, this meant recognizing that the closure she once craved didn't need to come from him. Her closure was the fact that she could see the pattern clearly and no longer felt the urge to play along. The unexpected message wasn't a sign that she had regressed. It was simply an opportunity to see how differently she could respond now. If you find yourself in a similar spot, looking at a screen and feeling that old weight in your chest, use these 3 questions to ground yourself. First, what has actually changed in their tangible behavior, beyond the aesthetics of their words? Second, does this interaction respect the person I am today, or is it trying to talk to the version of me that used to be? Third, am I responding to the human being currently in front of me, or am I reacting to a hopeful, fictionalized version of them I've carried in my head? The return of an old relationship pattern doesn't mean your healing has failed. These dynamics don't necessarily vanish just because you have outgrown them. People may reappear for many reasons: loneliness, curiosity, unresolved feelings, or a desire to reconnect. Whatever the reason, you don't have to figure out their motive before deciding what is right for you. The liberating truth is this: you cannot always control who decides to walk back into your orbit. You cannot stop the past from occasionally tapping on your shoulder, but you have absolute agency over whether that return pulls you back into the same pattern. You can't control the message, but you own the response. And sometimes, making that one different choice is exactly what healing looks like. Have you ever noticed an old pattern returning just when you felt you had moved on? What helped you realize you were responding differently this time? Share your experience in the comments below. If this perspective helped you see these dynamics more clearly, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the psychology of relationships and growth.